A warm welcome to my new video, the respiratory physiology. So, in this chapter, we are going to cover till the lung volume and capacities. The lung volume and capacities and the further topic will be in the next video. So, starting with the respiratory physiology. What is respiration? So, respiration is basically exchange of gases between the body and the external atmosphere. Now, the respiratory system. So what comes under the respiratory system? Respiratory system consists of, yes, primarily the lungs, the conducting pathways. Now what does this conducting pathways means? Conducting pathways are basically the trachea, starting from the nose, then the trachea, then the bronchus, principal bronchus, and then the bronchioles. Now, the third and the most important thing which everyone misses are the nerves which regulates respiration. So, coming to this picture, the left side picture, this picture consists of the conducting pathway, the trachea. This is the trachea. These are the lungs. And these are various bronchioles. Now, I will come to this picture a bit later, but first I will consider the functions of the respiratory system. So, for the functions of the respiratory system, what are the functions? Apart from respiration, there are other functions too. So, I have made a flow chart which consists of two divisions at the first. The two divisions are respiratory functions at the first, respiratory function which we will deal earlier, and the non-respiratory functions. So what are the non-respiratory functions which the respiratory system does? Now the first and the foremost function, non-respiratory function, is the filtration. So, filtration. So, there are three types in filtration. Turbulent precipitation, the first and the foremost type. Turbulent precipitation. Now, what is turbulent precipitation? So, as we breathe, the hair follicles in our nose try to filter the air by trapping the dust particles, the other pathogenic particles. So this is turbulent precipitation, and the size for turbulent precipitation should be more than 6 micrometer. So if the size is more than 6 micrometer, the hair follicles will trap the pathogenic bacteria or the dust particles. Now, the second type is gravitational precipitation. Gravitational precipitation. So, what is gravitational precipitation? So, the word gravity has come. So, it is related to gravity. So, what is it? So, the particles adhere to the terminal bronchiole and they settle down there. Adherence of this particle is gravitational, so it is gravitational precipitation, and the size of the particle should be in mid between 1 to 5 micrometer. Now, the third type is alveolar fluid. Basically, sticking to alveolar fluid. The explanation is self-explanatory, sticking to alveolar fluid. So, the particles come to the alveolar fluid and they got stuck in it. The size of the particles should be 0.5 to 1 micrometer. And the last, the suspended alveolar particle. It is not discussed, but as earlier I have said, these three are the most important, but this is clinically important. Suspended in alveolar fluid. So suspended in alveolar fluid, it is very dangerous if the particles get suspended in the alveolar fluid, they are less than 0.5, sorry, they are less than 0.5 micrometer, or they are between 0.1 to 0.4 micrometer. This data is from Guyton. Now, as I have said, this is clinically important. What is it clinically important? So, clinically important is the smoke particles. When one performs smoking, the particles are less than 0.5 micrometer. So, we get suspended in the alveolar fluid and we can get respiratory disorder. Now, the second non-respiratory function is the immune function. Immune function of the respiratory system. So what is the immune function of the respiratory system? See, now many pathogens, many bacteria get stuck in the airways. So they need to be digested. So there are two methods of the immune system to destroy this bacteria. That is digestible, and second is non-digestible. Digestible is pretty simple. Digestible means a pathogen comes in the respiratory pathway and our immune system responds to it and it is destroyed. So it is digestible. It is pretty simple. But in non-digestible, suppose these are the pathogens which has came in the airway. Now this is one pathogen microscopically. Now our immune system, basically the B lymphocytes come into action of this particle. So suppose this is the B lymphocyte. So this B lymphocytes come to the particle and forms a structure like this, and further this structure is like this. This is the pathogen and it is surrounded by the B lymphocyte and it is eventually digested. Now this is harmful. If this type of bacteria comes which is non-digestible and our B lymphocyte responds to it, it is harmful. Why? So clinically it can lead to fibrosis. Suppose these all bacteria are non-digestible and B lymphocyte comes into action. B lymphocytes engulf all the bacteria. So what are these structure going to? Where are this structure going to? This structure will go to the lungs and deposit there and will lead to fibrosis. So this was the clinical importance. Now, one non-respiratory function which is one of the most important function, and you may pretty well know this, it is the metabolism. So what is metabolism? Metabolism is formation or breakdown. So metabolism of one of the important enzyme, angiotensin converting enzyme. So angiotensin converting enzyme, what it does? It converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, as we have studied in the renal system, the RAS mechanism. Now the last non-respiratory function is the vocalization. I will write vocalization here as there is no availability of space. Vocalization. So what is vocalization? Vocalization is moving of vocal cords and accessory muscles for voice production. Now vocalization, the main functions for vocalizations are, which is done by respiratory system, is the phonation and the articulation. So what is phonation? Phonation is basically, there are two vocal cords, they starts moving and hence sound is produced. These are basically vibrations and the vocal cords moves. So phonation means producing of sound. Articulation is basically which improvement in quality of sound. So when you talk, you observe your nose or your mouth, some amount of air is all coming or going from the nose, so it aids in your speech. So the respiratory function of vocalization is pretty much important. Now also the last function is acid base balance, the most important function. It is elimination of CO2. Now here we complete the functions of respiratory function system. Now the structure, the diagram which I had left earlier, I will bring it here. What was that? So it was the respiratory membrane. So what is respiratory membrane? So respiratory membrane basically means the hindrance or the layer which is useful for respiration. Now why it is important? Why do we have to study? So we have to study it as this is the RBC. I will first mark it. This is the RBC and this is the respiratory membrane. This one is the respiratory membrane. So we have to study because we have to penetrate to this membrane to reach the RBC. Similarly, we have to penetrate this membrane to reach the atmosphere. Now, what comes from the atmosphere to the RBC? Obviously, it is mixed gases. Particularly, we will take it as O2 because we have to go through this. For O2, we consume O2, so we have to take O2 from the atmosphere. So I am writing here O2, but ideally all gases come to this. Now this membrane filters and O2 is reached here. Further, what goes from the RBC to CO2? It is the what comes from the RBC to the atmosphere? It is CO2. Now what are these layers? The colorful structure, these layers. So this layer, the first layer which is at the atmosphere, it is the surfactant layer. And you very well know surfactants function as the lowers the surface tension. Now what is this layer? This is the alveolar epithelium. Now this green layer in back of alveolar epithelium, what is this? It is the basement membrane, alveolar basement membrane. It is the alveolar basement membrane. Now this pretty big structure in between, this orange structure, this is the interstitial space. Now as we have seen earlier, this is the basement membrane. This is also the basement membrane, but this basement membrane is of the capillary basement membrane. This is the capillary basement membrane. Now you have guessed it right, the last layer. What is the last layer? This is the endothelium, which is made up of simple squamous. Yes. So these are the components. These are the 6 components which aids in respiration, the respiratory membrane. So going further with the topic, now we will discuss about the mechanism of breathing. What is the mechanism of breathing? So first I will write here mechanism of breathing. Mechanism of breathing. So there is a pretty much good flowchart in Guyton which has been given in mechanism of breathing. Mechanism of breathing is basically inspiration and expiration. It is inspiration and this is expiration. This is the superficial touch of the topic, inspiration and expiration. So Now what is inspiration? Inspiration is basically we receive some stimulus for inspiration from the brain. Now this inputs, this respiratory signals will go to the inspiratory muscles. Inspiratory muscle is basically the diaphragm. So now the signals for the diaphragm is going. Now the diaphragm contracts. So what will happen? The chest wall expands. The chest wall expands. The three types of movements will occur. Now the volume of thorax will increase. And as the chest is expanding, what will be the intrapleural pressure? The intrapleural pressure becomes more negative. Okay. Now, and what will happen to the alveolar pressure? Alveolar pressure and the atmosphere pressure. So basically alveolar pressure is decreasing and the atmosphere pressure is increasing. So the air will flow from high pressure to low pressure, that is the atmosphere to the alveoli, and the intrapleural pressure is already negative, and the lungs inflate and we get the air. The opposite step occurs in expiration. Expiration is a passive process. The diaphragm relaxes, the inspiratory muscles relaxes. Now volume of thorax decreases, the chest wall rebounds or retracts to the original position, intrapleural pressure becomes less negative, the alveolar pressure increases, and the alveolar pressure increases above the atmosphere pressure because the atmosphere pressure is normal and the air flows out from the alveoli. This is basically inspiration and expiration. Now the main part for mechanism of breathing is the work of breathing. So this work of breathing will be dealt earlier, just a second, a little earlier, because we have to learn a very important concept, which is compliance. Why I am taking compliance first? Because people get confused in compliance and elasticity. So basically I also got confused. I read work of breathing at the first and then I read compliance. So I got confused. Therefore I am taking compliance first. So what is compliance? Compliance is, all will say it is the change in volume per change in pressure. This is compliance. But what is the feel of compliance? So there is an experiment to get the feel of the compliance. Suppose we have an eraser. Okay, we have an eraser. Now if we stretch this eraser a bit, a moderate, so it will maintain its shape. It will try to recoil but not at that intensity. So if we stretch it moderately, it will try to recoil but not at a certain extent. It will maintain its shape. But if I try to stretch it maximally, now it will try to recoil. Now in the first case, when it is trying to maintain its shape, it is more compliant and less elastic. But if I stretch it maximally, the elasticity is more and compliance is less. So it is more elastic and less compliant. This is the feel of compliance. So basically if we if we applied in the lungs, if we are taking tidal volume, so here in this case the lung is more compliant. But if we breathe maximally at its peak, then the lung is more elastic and less compliant. So this is the feel of compliance. So compliance here in basically is delta V by delta P. Now what are the factors which affect compliance? The factors which affect compliance are the elasticity of lungs, then the elasticity of chest wall, and the surface tension. Now I will take this picture a bit to explain you. At the first, I will explain the first part. Just a second. Elasticity of lungs. Now suppose you are breathing and breathing normally, but at some time in some patient fibrosis occurs. So what is fibrosis? Pulmonary fibrosis occur in this lung. Okay, I will write here fibrosis. To be specific, pulmonary fibrosis. Now since pulmonary fibrosis occur, the lung has lost its ability to grow. Like if air is coming like this, it is going here in the alveoli, but the lung is not able to inflate itself. So what is the use? So it is not able to it is not able to grow. So the elasticity will increase. Why? As we have learned, the elasticity will increase. Why? So the lung has a natural tendency to recoil itself in the body. So here fibrosis occur, so it is not able to inflate itself, but it has a natural tendency to recoil. So the recoiling capacity, what is recoiling? It is the elasticity. So increase elasticity. And now what will happen to the compliance? Since the lung is not able to inflate, it can't maintain its shape. It is recoiling and recoiling. It is not able to maintain its shape. So the compliance obviously decreases. So elasticity of lung is a determinant of compliance. Now the elasticity of chest wall. Sorry, it is taking time for the diagrams to be made. Now elasticity of chest wall. So if the patient is suffering from kyphosis, kyphosis, or one more disease is scoliosis. Now in this case, we will take kyphosis. So in this case, kyphosis, what happens? The patient leans forward. So the thoracic wall or the anterior chest wall is basically in leaning forward. So it is not able to expand. So since it is not able to expand, the lung will also be not expanded. Okay. So the lung will be expanded less. The red one shows the lungs is less expanded. So not able to expand. So it is not able to expand. So what happened to the compliance? Since how much it is expanded, but it is not able to maintain its shape. It goes in deflating position again and again. So compliance decreases and elasticity increases. Now in this case, one more thing, we also know there is a layer, visceral pleura, in the lungs. So in emphysema, so we have described pulmonary fibrosis in this right lung, see this one. Now we will describe emphysema. So what does emphysema means? Emphysema, basically the air comes, smoke particles are adhered to here, and this layer of the visceral pleura, this layer is destroyed. So what happens? Basically the lungs can be expanded at its minimal. They are not able to recoil so fast. It can expand minimally, maximally. So in this case, emphysema, the compliance increases and the elasticity decreases. Why? Because the visceral pleura is destroyed. Now the lungs can be expanded maximally. So it can be maximally expanded, so it can maintain its shape. It is not able to recoil because of that emphysema kind of thing. So the elasticity decreases and the compliance increases. Now for the surface tension, we have to go into that alveoli kind of thing, this alveoli kind of thing. So just a second. So this is the alveoli. We have magnified this alveoli. So there is a fluidy layer in the alveoli for gaseous exchange. As we have seen in the respiratory membrane, there are various kinds of things. So this fluid layer for gaseous exchange. So what does this fluid layer is about? It is about gaseous exchange. So gaseous exchange is occurring here, gaseous exchange is occurring here. So there is a natural tendency that there will be pressure like this, because there is a air medium, there is a liquid medium, so there is a natural tendency that pressure will be like this. So this is one alveoli, this one is one alveoli. So if that pressure is going like this, like this, like this, like this, like this, like this, so the alveoli can collapse, but it doesn't. Why? So here it is the same alveoli, the same fluidy layer, but now here is the presence of the surfactant. There is surfactant. So in this case, is above case, if this pressure is more, so the surface tension is more. Because of this fluid layer and this air medium, the surface tension will be more in the absence of surfactant. But in this alveoli, surfactant is present. Surfactant is present. Surfactant, what does surfactant do? It basically decreases surface tension. So the less pressure will be applied in this direction and the more pressure will be applied in this direction. So like this, like this, like this, like this. This was all about compliance. So we have spoke about the mechanism of breathing. After that, we have hold this topic, the work of breathing. We will talk about it. The compliance. What is compliance? Is C is equal to delta V by delta P. And what is this delta P? Delta P is transpulmonary pressure. So the definition of the compliance is, it is change in volume per change in transpulmonary pressure. So this was the definition. Further, going with the topic now, finally we are off to work of breathing. Okay, now we will discuss about work. So now we are in work of breathing. So basically, what is work of breathing? Work of breathing is the work done in breathing. It is basically the same. So what is included in the work of breathing? It is, the work of breathing consists of these two, basically three. So this is the first is flow resistance work. The second work is the elastic work, or the work done against compliance. So this is important. This is the point where I got confused in learning this elasticity and compliance. So this work done against compliant, it is not elastic work or compliant work, it is elastic work or work done against the compliance. And the third is tissue resistance. Tissue resistance, this tissue resistance work is kind of a little negligible work, but it should be included. So now we will discuss the work of breathing. Just a second, I will add the units. Okay, now these are the units. This is on the y-axis we can see the lung volume in liters and the pleural pressure on the x-axis. So this is the values. Similarly, this is the diagram of the lungs. Now in normal conditions, in normal condition we observe inspiration and expiration of the lungs. Okay, so this in the graph represent inspiration. Okay, now expiration is the reverse process. So expiration is this. So basically we are going like this. Just a second. This is inspiration, this is expiration. Now this is inspiration. As it is the first diagram, I will mention all the things. This is expiration. Now what is the role of this? The flow resistance work, the elastic work. So basically the flow resistance work, it is in the name, the flow resistance work. So when we breathe, there are many hindrances like the hair follicles, some mucus, some other restrictions. So we have to break that resistance and go in the lungs. So this breaking is the flow resistance work. So the breaking, the flow resistance work will be during inspiration or expiration? Obviously inspiration, as we are going in, we are breaking the resistances. So this part, just a second, I will use a brighter color. This part is the, I will write it here also, flow resistance work. This part is the flow resistance work. Now the elastic work. So as we have seen in a normal or quiet breathing, what we do tidal respiration. So in tidal respiration we tend to inspire. So if we inspire, the lung becomes more compliant. So more compliant. Now the lung has a natural tendency to recoil backwards. So it will try to recoil backwards. This is the elasticity. So elastic work is occurring. Okay, now it is occurring during expiration. So somewhere around here it is the maximal breathing. Now this whole part, this is the, just a second, I will also mention it here. This is the elastic work, and the blue one we have seen is the flow resistance work. Okay, this is the elastic work, this yellow part, and this is the flow resistance work, the blue part. During inspiration we have to break all the hindrances or the resistance. So we have to break the resistance by flow of air, so flow resistance work. And during expiration we have to overcome the compliance by means of elasticity. So this is the elastic work, this yellow one. Now the main topics for this work of breathing is the restrictive disease at the first, and then the obstructive disease. So what is actually restrictive and obstructive disease? How to differentiate them? So basically there's one concept which will help us in differentiating this restrictive and obstructive disease. So restrictive diseases are basically the destruction of the lung parenchyma. So I will show the lung parenchyma. What is it? Lung parenchyma are various tissues surrounding the alveoli. Means they are the chief makers of the lung. So these are the lung parenchyma around alveolar tissues. Like this, here also around the alveolar tissue. So what does this lung parenchyma do? So if air comes in the alveoli, it fills the alveoli, gaseous exchange occurs. Now what does happen? Also the gaseous exchange occur. O2 has gone to the to the RBC, the mixed gases, or O2 basically. The CO2 has come in here. So what does it do? The CO2 comes, it should go out of the respiratory system. Also it goes out. But in this procedure, if we take a macroscopic view at the alveoli, now if CO2 is here in the alveoli, it has to be pumped out. So for pumping out, some changes will come in the alveoli, like it will try to deflate itself, and this deflation causes CO2 out. Now what does this lung parenchyma do? Lung parenchyma basically retracts the alveoli to its original shape. So basically this was CO2 in the alveoli. This, if we press the alveoli, the CO2 goes out, and this, due to the lung parenchyma, the alveoli comes to its original shape. Now what it does in restrictive lung disease? Restrictive lung disease, there is a destruction of this lung parenchyma. All this lung parenchyma goes around the alveoli. So since this lung parenchyma will go, this position, this, as we are pressing the alveoli, this position will be there, and this position will not occur. Why? Because absence of this lung parenchyma. So the tissue flow resistance work. The tissue flow resistance work, the inspiration is like this. So we have represent, I'm so sorry. The tissue resistance work, the flow resistance work will be normal, because the lung is going, the air is going normally in the lungs. But as radial traction, the phenomena of which the lung parenchyma retracts the alveoli to its natural position is known as radial traction. So there is absence of radial traction. So what will happen? The elastic work of bringing the lungs back to normal position will increase maximally. So the elastic work increases in restricted disease. Why? Because to bring the lung in natural position is tough, and the flow resistance is normal. Why? As the air is entering, the air is going to the alveoli, it is normal. Now what happens in obstructive diseases exactly? So obstructive diseases are the diseases where there is obstruction in the conducting pathways. So basically, if there is obstruction in the trachea, or there might be some disorder like bronchitis, so there is obstruction here, obstruction here, obstruction here. For example, we are taking obstruction this much, so there will be obstruction here also at the junction of the alveoli. Sometimes there will be more obstruction, more and more. Now we have to pump the air in through this pathway and then to the alveoli. Okay, this is the atmospheric air. This is going to the alveoli. Now tell me one logic. it is easier to go to this pathway, it is easier for the air to go through this pathway or through this pathway? Obviously this pathway. Why? Because the pathway here is narrow. The pathway here is narrow. So if it is the narrow pathway, so as we have seen earlier, what is this? What is this term? Flow resistance work. It is the work done by airflow. It is the work done by airflow against resistance. So this is the resistance. This hindrance is the resistance. So since this hindrance is the resistance, the tissue flow work will increase. So the tissue flow work is increasing. Now if I am taking air, if I am throwing it out, okay, what was this? The elastic work. I am taking air, it is going out. Minimal air out. So minimal exchange of gases, but the air is going out, so the lung will come to its normal position automatically. We are forcefully breathing, we are forcefully inspiring, but we can't control expiration. Expiration is a passive process, and since less air is here, for example here it is less air, as less air is come from this conductive part. See, from this atmosphere less air has come, so till it reaches here it becomes minimal. So that minimal air by exchange of gases comes here and it goes out. So there is no affection of the elastic work. So elastic works remains normal in this case. See, elastic work remains normal in this case. So how can we differentiate between restrictive and obstructive diseases like clinically? So if there is some lung disease and a patient comes to you, we can give him asthma pumps. So basically obstructive disease includes asthma. So if the patient has asthma, so he will be not aware about what is obstructive disease, what is restrictive disease. So how will you differentiate? So if we give some asthma pump and if we measure his compliance before giving the pump and after giving the pump, so what will be the result? Before giving the pump, the graph will be like this because there is asthma, and after giving the pump, the hindrance which is here, it will be avoided because of that pump. So the graph will be nearly to this, nearly, not fully, but a little less to it or nearly to this. So this will be obstructive disease, not a restrictive disease. So that was all about it. We studied about first the respiratory system, the functions of the respiratory system, the respiratory membrane, then the mechanism of breathing. We halted at work of breathing. We gone to the concept of compliance, what is compliance and the difference between compliance and elasticity. Now we have done the work of breathing, the difference between the restrictive disease, obstructive disease, and the graphs. Just a second to add something to this graph. The elastic work is this yellow whole thing. So thank you for watching this.